Hey guys, Missing Pixel here. Welcome to Davilex Overflow, a show all about Davilex's racing games. For this feature video, we are going to be looking at every London Racer, A2 Racer, Autobahn Raser and Marseille Racing game. Not just reviewing each game, but checking out the secrets that lie in each game, looking at development screenshots and even developer interviews. As always, there are timecodes to see your favourite game. I'll skip my opinions of each game and get straight into debug and hidden stuff. For today's video, however, we'll be focusing on the first generation of Davilex games from 1997 to 2001, before the switch over to Game Biro, since this video is quite long as is. I guess I'll make an honourable mention to Davilex's first game in the Racer series, A2 Racer. Although it's really nothing special to talk about. You drive down the A2 motorway, well, in theory anyway, since the driving model feels more like walking Lego Island. It feels like you're going around the game in free cam. Hit anything and your car instantly slows down to a crawl, if not completely. There are police that stop and fine you, in a really unfair way of just pretty much jumping in front of you. There are pickups for time bonuses, since the time is ticking away, and as well as a pickup for money, which is useless since you cannot buy different cars or upgrades. There is a fuel pickup, since the fuel constantly goes down. Now something that we see in future games, other than in Autobahn Raser. Really, the only thing worth mentioning is the music, which is pretty sweet. The game is also a right bugger to run on not even necessarily a modern system, but even my Windows 98 Pentium 2 emulated PC runs the game too fast. I had to drop down to a Pentium 1. So yeah, the physics are hard coded to a certain CPU speed, it seems. In terms of debug stuff, there's quite a few nice tweaks we can do, like make the opponents and police slower, a debug string that outputs a game log, and it looks like you can fold the game into entering late stages, though I did not get that to work. And really, that's about it. Simple game, simple debug. Autobahn Raser was released a year later, in mid-1998. Surprisingly, the game starts you with a purchase car screen, as in you already have the Trabant, but you can buy another car if you'd like, as the game gives you enough money to not just buy a different car, but to buy modifications right off the bat. Unlike the later games, there are no leagues here, so after one or two races you can go straight into owning a supercar. I quite like this industrial UI with an equally industrial main menu theme. We'll see it in A2 Racer 2, but not anywhere else afterwards. While A2 Racer 2, which I'll talk about in just a second, brings a lot of gameplay tweaks that make it closer to the other titles in this generation, Autobahn Raser is its own weird thing. The cars are really rather slow compared to the later titles, and this handling model is kind of terrible. It's like if the car had two wheels in the middle of it, with both the way the car rolls and the way it handles. It's like moving a big plastic container full of water. When you tilt it, not much happens until all the water rushes to one side and becomes very heavy on that side. That's with the Trabant. The handling model isn't as bad once you buy faster cars, but the fact that they can take a corner at full speed with no speed loss is interesting. There's a few weird mechanics that don't persist into the later titles, one of which is the nitro. It replenishes itself automatically, although rather slowly, and you'll use that nitro in about 0.5 seconds, which I think is another clock speed glitch. This nitro replenishment system makes sense, as you do not have quick service like in the later titles. There is a fuel stop though, as like with A2 Racer, your car is constantly running out of fuel. When I try to stop at it, the game kicks me out to the main menu. I looked up a review of this game just to make sure that it's not my system, and nope, a fellow YouTuber by the name of Capuexe also had the same issue. So the only way you can play this game is by letting the car run out of fuel, which in turn stops your car. You get a warning message, and then you get refueled to about halfway, or just not playing 3D accelerator mode, and instead play in the software rendering mode, which also fixes the nitro issue. And since there is no repair service, if your car gets too dinged up, a yellow car will come and repair it, but again, your car stops for this, so you end up losing your position. The gameplay follows a structure like in the later titles, where you start in a city, then take the Autobahn, then arrive in another city. Oh, and while this game, as well as the later ones in the series, have a radar system, instead of getting a bonus for knocking them down, here you actually get fined for speeding past them. The graphics are so ugly in my opinion. You'll see how much better it gets with the later titles. Yeah, the game is just murky visually, and the 3D modelling is pretty basic. Later titles even have your car's window reflect the skybox, but that's not the case here. Interestingly enough, there's also a magazine building, with the Dr. Edgar logo on it, although I think that's supposed to be a parody of the brand, though with how low-res the texture work is, it could just be the actual logo. Anyway, a lot of the cities look and play the same, and the textures repeat constantly. It's just a really boring game to play. And other than the standout features I spoke about here, that and in the later titles, a lot of the gameplay carries forward too. A2 Racer 2 was released a few months later in November 1998. Unlike most other titles, the police here are right buggers. Yes, they're annoying in London Racer, and unfair in Autobahn Raser, but here they are straight up overpowered. Speeding past you at easily double the speed, and they seem to exist purely to block you and your opponents. Which is very easy, since like the previous, and unlike later, titles, you cannot drive on curbs. And seeing how tight the cities in Netherlands are, it really does make the game challenging. You cannot just dodge and weave through traffic, you sometimes do have to slow right down and wait to be able to pass a car in front of you. The game isn't all too tricky since the opponents love to crash into everything in front of them, but just like the police, they will randomly zoom ahead for no reason, and then crash, so that equals that out. Also, the game's presentation is better than in Autobahn Raser, for definite, but it's still ugly. But yeah, we have some little jokes, like McDonald's is called the Mac, and Shell is called Shelp. But yeah, the fundamentals are here, but tracks do lack environmental detail, and the textures and models are comparatively basic. Believe it or not, there's no in-game music either, and the music that we get is the same as from the previous A2 Racer title, even though Autobahn Racer had unique music in-game. Alright, so how about some oddities? Since the menu doesn't have a quick race, nor time trial for that matter, there's a separate EXE that lets you go into quick race. And look at this, the official names of these cars. That's not good. Most of these are car manufacturer names, though Opel managed to get away, with the Astra just being called Astra. A fun fact, you can copy this EXE into any game from this era, and it'll work. The names of the tracks and cars are hard-coded, but at the end of the day, it's just sending an argument to the game engine to launch track 1 to 7 in player car 1 to 7. In fact, when trying this EXE in Europe Racer, the only game that it does not work with, you can see what the temporary INI file is that the engine recalls. Oh, and one last thing, the highway tracks have a special argument, which I believe not only handles the fact that it's a single lap track, but also gives you a timer, like the original game did, but not Autobahn Racer interestingly. In terms of debug files, we can change the amount of laps that we have to do in the city tracks, and we can also change the difficulty. The game is set to hard by default, but I'm not quite sure what changing it to easy does. Perhaps change traffic density? The opponents are still equally as fast, and the police are still homing missiles, and the car is still the same speed. In theory, we can change what upgrades we have and how much money we have, but changing these values doesn't seem to work. There's a value called Copland, but seemingly not even the developers knew what it does, and from memory, in every game afterwards it is set to 0. From what I've been able to deduct, having it enabled makes the police far easier. They didn't really bother with catching me. Having it off, as is default, had 3 cop cars literally making my car float in the air with how much they were pushing me about. It seems like there was supposed to be a particle effect system, including rain. While the particle system shows up later on, there has never been rain in any of these old racer games. There is a reference to a demo mode, though I couldn't get it trigger anything. We can also supposedly change difficulty, from 0 to 9, but again it didn't do anything. We can also change the AI model from Autobahn Racer to the new A2 Racer 2 model, which does work. With the old model, the AI cars are probably slower, but it's hard to tell because they have 0 avoidance of anything around them. If a car's in front of them, they won't even make an attempt to move out of its way. The old Autobahn Racer steering model can also be enabled if you're a masochist. You can also turn off collisions too. These configuration files exist in most other games of this era of theirs, so I won't bother looking at them on a game-by-game basis. Though I will show off tweak mode later on, as it is awesome. Also, in the later titles you can modify the main menu INI files to hand translate each game back into English, though you cannot do that here. But since the game engine is separate to the main menu, the in-game text can be changed back to English with the language.ini file. Wait, back to English? Yeah, weird. This game supports English despite the fact that it never released in the UK. In fact, if you don't have the CD in when you launch a race, it'll ask you for the M25 CD. Despite the fact that M25 Racer, later named London Racer, wasn't even released at this point. It looks like Davilex was planning a UK game very early on, since M25 Racer hadn't released for another 10 months at this point. Some of you may have not even known this, but London Racer wasn't the original name of the game. In fact, when you install the game with the official London Racer disc, you will see a reminiscence of the previous name of the game. And if you listen carefully to some of the BC tracks,
Traffic jam. M25.
yeah, references to M25. Which is a real motorway in the UK, so you may have never even noticed that these 2 songs refer to the original title of the game. The PS1 version of London Racer doesn't use these musical tracks however, instead using the Autobahn Racer versions. Which I wonder if that was an oversight or intentionally done to remove any reference to M25. If we go on eBay, we can see that the game was originally released as a big box. I somehow even managed to find the original trailer for both M25 Racer and London Racer, which is impressive as trying to find anything about M25 Racer has proved to be very difficult, no thanks to Davilex's website being very poorly preserved during the short period of time of M25's existence. And also the fact Davilex kept changing URLs. I will talk about the M25 Racer trailer later on in the video, But I found it interesting that we can see the beta logo for London Racer within the London Racer trailer, which would have had the road sign say London Racer as opposed to M25 on the M25 Racer's logo. Of course, the final logo ended up sticking to that iconic design that persisted right until the final game. So I guess this is as good of a time as any to boot up M25 Racer and see if there's anything different. Two obvious changes stick out. One, the logo in the menu had changed, obviously. And two, there are names for the cars, while in the final London Racer, they are just referred to as Car 1, 2 and 3. I was dreading playing this game because of the first stage. Your car is too slow, and even if you are the most careful driver, the AI will randomly catch up to you. It's the classic rhyme. Roses are red, the sky is blue, opponents in London Racer are faster than you. The best way to beat the stage, other than not crashing, is to hope that the opponents crash instead. Thankfully, and luckily, I managed to beat the stage on my first try. When I loaded up the second stage, exact same thing. Opponents go ahead of me. I was struggling to overtake. Then I crashed and at that point it was game over. But you earn enough money in the first stage to buy your first upgrade. And that honestly makes a world of a difference. But yeah, to reiterate for the last time, everything on the road is a brick that stops you dead in your tracks, opponents included. It really does make the game infuriating if you're not careful, though you can buy nitro and speed past your opponents, or use it to thread the needle between traffic cars. It does make the game easier. If you thought the opponents were infuriating, don't worry as the police are on your tail, trying to stop you by any means necessary. And by that I mean they will randomly decide to slam on the handbrake and block you. You are on a warning system. Like the real British traffic cops, you are always given a warning first, but if you get caught too many times, you are busted. Again, as long as you speed past the police, they will eventually give up. It's quite cool that you can hear the police talk. Very similar to Most Wanted, in the fact that the officers read out your car's name and where you are currently located, and will eventually report that they've lost pursuit or that it's too dangerous for them to continue. And considering the types of roadblocks they put into place, they don't seem too asked about catching you anyway. Or maybe it's budget cuts. Well, this game is realistic. Interesting that despite the removal of car names in London Racer, the police will still announce the name of your vehicle, as was written in the M25 Racer. If you do get yourself too bashed up, there are pit stops within the tracks that are used to recover nitro and repair your vehicle. And the final interesting thing about this game are the graphics. I do love them. In fact, I love all of the pre-game Biro engine games. Davilex managed to cram in so much environmental detail into the tracks, with plenty of landmarks to boot. And while the tracks are by no means one-to-one replicas of the real world, they feel far more realistic than the PS2 era games in location accuracy. They do feel like a more condensed version of London, with some extra roads removed, and other roads shortened, than the landmarks scattered on random unrelated roads like in London Racer 2. But for 1999, this was probably the pinnacle of realistic street racing. Or maybe it wasn't, I don't know. Practically every game at that time was set in America. The game does have a nice representation of the South, with a lot of track variety. Not just city roads, but motorways, country roads, and we even get to see Oxford too. It captures the essence of the British roads well, and it's so cool that even the Millennium Dome is in this. This wasn't open to the public when the game was published. Now you may know it as the O2 Arena, after the name change in 2005. The game also has some lovely, colourful pre-baked lighting, which helps to create the illusion of graphics better than they actually are. And speaking of which, we are entirely dependent on photorealistic graphics, which is very of its time. On the CRT, the natural blending of the display genuinely makes these textures more convincing, though if you play the game on a modern LCD in high resolution, yeah, you can tell that those are just pictures slapped onto textures. I personally like either vibe though, and that's what I really enjoy about many 90s arcade games. And for any detail that the devs weren't able to add, the sound effects help to fill in the gaps, with people talking inside the gallery, the Big Ben dinging, birds chirping, and so on. Something that I didn't realise with both games is the fact you get different weather effects and different times of day depending on the restart of the game. You can see this is currently at night time. If I restart, look, it's daytime. It's the foggy daytime. I had no idea about this. Did you guys? Please let me know in the comments. Look, even the skybox is incorrect as the reflection of the window. But as far as I can tell, all that changed between M25 Racer and London Racer was the menu, which makes me wonder, what would happen if I tried to copy over M25's user data into London Racer? If I launch into London Racer, we get an error message. And then a black screen, and then we have to Alt F4, we get the error message again. Boom. Now we have two log files. The menu log complains about a few things. That debug does not exist, unsuccessfully tried to access a bitmap, and an address violation. So let me go into my backup and put in the menu INI from London Racer to London Racer. Launch the game, should work. But play data does not work between M25 Racer and London Racer, which is very interesting. so it makes us do it again. Now, on the right hand side, you see the London Racer INI file. On the left hand side is the M25 Racer INI. And you can notice a few new strings that aren't in the M25 one. We also have some different control keys. And finally, the thing that the game was complaining about, debug on, exists in London Racer but doesn't in M25 Racer. And here are the differences between the two settings pages. Same image, I know it looks darker on your screen, the London Racer one. They are the exact same image, just the M25 Racer says M25 Racer and something. Those are literal pixels, you cannot make out what that says at all. And there are some minor, less interesting things. So the menu for the London Racer is 4.7 megs, one for M25 Racer is 8.2. If we start M25 Racer, it will say, please use M25Racer.exe to start up the game, while with the London Racer one, it will say, start the game with LondonRacer.exe.
Okay, let's look at the final leads of what had changed between M25 Racer and London Racer then. As seen by the version text file, M25 Racer was built on the 14th of September 1999. This is incidentally the same date A2 Racers 3 was built. Davilex wasn't linked this day as a UK exclusive, eh? The M25 Racer trailer mentions a release date of October 4th, 1999, so we know as to when the game was built and published. But what about London Racer? The game was built on the 14th of May 2000 and released in September 2000. That means 8 months had gone by between the two games in terms of build date and 11 months between the releases. Oh, and there's one more change within the menu too. After you beat all 3 leagues, the first game mentions that you are the M25 Racer, while the second game mentions that you are the London Racer. However, the narrator doesn't read the latter line, and I presume that in M25 Racer she reads the former line, and that they've just cut the line in London Racer because they reference the original title of the game. But I haven't beat M25 Racer, so you guys will have to let me know, or I'll post a comment once I do beat the game. So to try to make a guess on why the name was changed, it could have been due to Davilex changing UK publishers. Maybe the London Racer name was more profitable or recognisable, and either Davilex or the new publishers want to change it. Alternatively, it could have been changed for legal reasons. 2 publishers releasing the same game in the same region within less than 12 months doesn't seem likely, so maybe the name was changed, so that it could count as a new game. Or, since the game was being released on PlayStation, maybe Davilex wanted to do a second round of PR. You know, hey, we have a new game coming out on PlayStation type of thing.
A few weeks after M25 Racer, Autobahn Raser 2 was released. Since it came out so close to M25 Racer's release date, it's overall a nearly identical game. And once again, the first track really does give the game a bad first impression with how slow the mini is. In fact, unlike in London Racer, it seems that the upgrades don't help out as much. And I had to buy a Trabant later on to make sure that I definitely win the last handful of races, since once it is upgraded, it is so overpowered. The police also don't seem to be as much of a bastard as they are in London Racer. I barely had them approach me, although with how tight these tracks are, and with how many traffic cars there are, the opponents and police kept crashing into them. The police don't really seem to do any dynamic roadblocks either. The tracks are beautiful though, and they are a joy to drive through. Each track has a lot of location variety, driving through markets, parks, train stations and shopping centres. Once again, compared to Autobahn Raser 4 on PS2, these worlds feel far more alive and seem more realistic, although I haven't been to these cities personally, so I cannot talk about accuracy. Autobahn Raser 4 felt like a model playset, where there are some main standout landmarks and visual identities of the cities, but the tracks feel tiny, and you'll be driving from landmark to landmark in mere seconds on roads that don't even remotely exist in the real world. Autobahn Raser 2's maps remind me of some 3D renders I've seen of Birmingham done in the PS1 style, where you think, yep, I've walked past those streets, but here they are in low poly. All of the architecture, the churches, the markets, it really does remind me of many of Poland's cities, so I feel right at home. Compared to London Racer, these tracks are way more fun. London Racer was realistic in its own right with the way the motorways, countryside and London was portrayed. But here, because of the bigger variety between each track, it does make the game feel fresher. And because we get right into the city, again not just driving on the roads but inside the parks and supermarkets, it's so fun. And the lighting is once again really nice. I love how Dortmund's track has you take a big roundabout and drive back to where you started, for example. That's not something that was done in London Racer. Although for the most part, the track layout is very predictable, since where you need to go tends to be right in front of you, if that makes sense. Like A2 Racers 2, there are some little jokes and Easter eggs in the tracks, like a fake Aldi and an ad for Red Cat, like in the original Autobahn Raser. And with such a beautiful game, why don't we finally take a look at Tweak Mode, which adds extra camera controls, ability to spawn in particle effects, and gives you a frame rate counter. Normally, you only have camera 1 to 4, while here we have all 9 keys in use. Plus you can move around with your mouse, or special keyboard keys, which lets you do a basic no-clip, although the camera is still locked onto your car. But yeah, these camera controls were no doubt used for the screenshots for the box art. You can even reset the camera with R and zoom in and out with I and J if I remember correctly. There's one extra INI string that has been added to this variation of the engine, and that is British mode, which spawns in the cars on the left side of the road, though the cars turn around and drive the tracks in reverse, and eventually the game logic gets confused about non-existent waypoints and crashes. Within these strings, we can also see that the AI was once again updated in M25 Racer, which makes sense, as this was the best AI system so far. And we can finally disable police now, as well as traffic, opponents, bonus checkpoint system, and even turn off the damage. It is amusing that a string still says particle effects not implemented, but they obviously are, hence why it's enabled by default. Still, the rain particles are enabled, but there's no rain in the game, so that string must have been reused for something else. An interesting tidbit is that London Racer and M25 Racer don't have the comments for what each string does, and this is because it was causing compatibility problems with NT-based systems, therefore the patch removes these. Around the same time, the Netherlands received a version of Autobahn Raser 2 and M25 Racer, called A2 Racer 3 Europa Tour. This was the first game that the Dutch got to experience with this new iteration of the engine. I guess this is as natural of a breakpoint as ever to say that there's a tool called Davilex that lets you extract the RCS files from these 90s Davilex games. But with no downloadable packages and just some PHP code, I haven't got a clue in the slightest how to use it. So hey, if you guys can figure it out, let me know and I'll make an addendum video. And also, I've come to find out that London Racer received a demo version. It's interesting. Instead of redoing the menu, Davilex decided to basically reuse the quick race exe idea that they had, hard launching the game from it. You can only launch into one race with 2 cars to choose from, and you can only use 3D acceleration. When you quit out of the exe, you get a little advertising screen, like a 90s shareware title. And once again, Davilex drops in the real car names, amazing. And that close button is so funny. And yes, that quick race exe from earlier doesn't help us to bypass the stage or car limitation, since they have been scrubbed from the files. Best I can do is spawn in a yellow Porsche. Vacantia Racer was released in the year 2000 in the Netherlands. In Germany it was released under the name of Urlaubs Racer, and in early 2001 in the UK under the name of Holiday Racer. This is one of my favourite games of this generation as it oozes charm. As with all other games, we get an intro explaining the law of the game, though here it's more important. We are on a game show called International Lottery Live. There are 5 winners, and the prize is staying at Camping Valhalla, a campsite in Monaco. The site is booked out for the next 20 years. However, the lottery show managed to get the last camping spot, but since there is only one camping spot, the winners have to compete against each other to get there first, similar in concept to the critically acclaimed 2001 movie Rat Race. And by critically acclaimed, I am the critic. You may have noticed a familiar voice from the show's presenter.
But, you said one camping spot, am I right?
Yep, it's the same voice actor as the DJ in London Racer 2. In fact, he voices a few characters within this game too. But speaking of which, yeah, our first in the Racer franchise, we get to pick a character and their associated car. A neat but completely inconsequential gimmick is the fact that most cars have something attached to it, like a camper or a jet ski for example. The game engine has been upgraded, and this results in genuinely fun gameplay. The cars are all fast by default, finally. The AI seem more fair than ever before, and crashing into cars no longer feels like crashing into a brick wall, since now they get pushed out of the way, sometimes with funny results. Instead of a quick service, we now instead have turbo pickups, again making the game more fun, since the turbo is not usually in the direct route, so you have to go out of your way to pick it up. As well as this, we have repair pickups, fast forward pickups and invincibility pickups. There are sunnies scattered around the maps. Think of these as in-game currency, as they can be exchanged for parts at the end of each stage. We also get a spin to wheel after each race to win more sunnies, or to win parts for your vehicle. The maps like Autobahn Raser 2 are all very pretty and are very fun to play. They all take place in France. Well, kind of. More on this in the next game. We get a completely new soundtrack too, which is a bop. And we get introductions to each stage by the presenter. They are all pretty amusing too, thanks to decent localization and of course the thick northern English accent of the presenter.
Paris, city of romance. I remember the first time we got along.
And what he says also does change based on what driver you've picked. Really, the game is just full of charm and it's a joy to play. Marseille Racing was surprisingly released after Holiday Racer, with the game files being around 2 months newer than Holiday Racer. In fact, while the game seems like another M25 Racer type game, mostly because it is, we do have some remains of Holiday Racer, like the update to HUD. The menu title is Autoroute Racer, a name I haven't heard before, but the engine exe is called Vacantia Racer. Within the debug log, there are some leftover exceptions from the development team, and one of which asks for the Autoroute Racer CD-ROM. Now if we take out the disc ourselves, the exception shows up as Marseille Racer. So there we are, a brand new discovery. Marseille Racer? Wait, Racer? This game is called Marseille Racing. For God's sake, Davilex. Whatever this game is called, Davilex seem to not have been sure themselves, and initially the name was going to be Autobahn Racer, it looks like. We do get some upgrades to the previous M25 codebase, like the new car renders, with reflections and what looks like ray trace lighting bouncing off the cars. Ooh. And then there are some janky things with the codebase, like how when you enter a league, the music goes all quiet, but unlike M25 Racer on Autobahn Racer 2, there is no narration. In fact, the welcome and finish waves, for entering and finishing a league respectively, are just a few seconds of silence, since I guess no one could be bothered to hire a voice actor to do the narration. According to one person, whose name I forgot, apparently the police also speak in broken French. If anyone watching this can speak French, please do confirm. We do have a new loading screen too, and in terms of gameplay, it's the standard Autobahn Racer 2 affair, including the slow mini, that even upgrades don't really help with. You get a lot of money for each race, and while upgrades are cheap, the other cars are dead expensive. A weird quirk, possibly due to the return of quick service not seen in Holiday Racer, is that your nitro does not replenish at the beginning of each stage, like in M25 Racer or Autobahn Racer 2. Most of the music is from M25 Racer, including the English singing, but there's at least one from Holiday Racer 2. It's taken me this long into the video to mention this, but each game in each country has car manufacturers specific to that country, plus some leftover cars added in, but I'm sure you've noticed that already. I'm bringing this up here, however, because there is a number of rally cars, which is quite unusual for a Davilex title. Of course, the devs being the devs left the original car names in the game files, yeah. Also, something funny left over in the files is the first track. Paris to Lille has another name called Need Name. Is it that the devs didn't know where the track was supposed to lead to originally? Possibly. I'll talk about this in a second. And to continue talking about the files, if you cannot be bothered to put the disc in, don't worry, the devs left in a batch file that lets you launch the game without a disc. Yep, they left no CD crack in the game. Absolutely phenomenal. And yes, provided you change the PMR to whatever game exe, the crack will absolutely work with other games. Or at least I've tried it with London Racer and it worked. But yeah, with the fact that this game borrows so much from Holiday Racer, there's not much more for me to say, other than the fact that Calais to Paris has been changed to Lille to Paris. So the border control had been removed. If you're paying attention, you may have thought what I just said is idiotic. And it is. In the Dutch version of Vacantia Racer, we actually start in the Netherlands, drive through Belgium and into France. And in the German version of Holiday Racer, we start in Aachen. So, when this game was localized to the UK, they forgot to make the change to the track, and rectified it in Marseille Racing, since we are no longer going through Belgium. Otherwise, there's a few small changes in the maps, like the fact that they had to add the quick service stations back, rather lazily but sure, and the radars are back. A2 Racer 4, also known as Autobahn Racer 3, was released in October 2000, and it's a rather strange game. Graphically, the game has a 1960s spy theme, which is neat. The story is more or less the same as you'd come to expect from these games. The police are trying to catch the motorway racers. Like Holiday Racer, we have a character select screen, with each character having different cars with different specs, and a presenter talking you through each stage. Though unlike other games, our tune-ups only last for one race, which sucks because the character that I've picked was slow as balls. Otherwise, I wouldn't really care. An interesting thing is that the tracks are basically swapped around. In Germany, you drive from Germany to the Netherlands, while in the Netherlands, you do the opposite. It's one of the few titles where the order of the tracks has changed. The game is a bit of a white whale for me, as no matter what system I run it on, I cannot get it to work as well as it should do. With this CRT gameplay, you are seeing software rendering under Windows XP, as trying to use 3D acceleration crashes the game, and likewise with my Windows 11 laptop. On the PCEM, I am able to use 3D acceleration, however the game does not run at full speed. It sucks either way, but I am not missing much here, since I am personally not a fan of this game. The cars are slow with no decent upgrade path, and the physics are really wacky. In fact, what is going on with these physics? I've seen trucks flip trying to drive down a decline, opponents that were stuck in the air, and even me hitting a bit of road debris has had my car flying. But playing this game on PCEM, the physics weren't as broken. So either the game does not like being run at 60 FPS, or it's another case of broken compatibility with XP, as is the case with the prior games. The tracks that are not reused from prior games, which to be fair is most of them, are quite fun. I especially like the airport level, and these newer tracks like in Holiday Racer offer different paths they can take. And since like in Holiday Racer the turbo, money, repairs and bonuses are scattered throughout the maps, taking the more dangerous route rewards you. The game is the only game to also feature free DLC from Davilex's website, unlocking an extra track, the country route from London Racer, and a car, well a truck, the same one that you see scattered throughout the stages that gives you repairs or other pickups. The idea of DLC was going to be carried over to Europe Racer, but no such content ever came to exist. In terms of races, we have a new game mode where we are on a timer in the city, and a big police SUV is trying to destroy us. You have to finish the stage before the timer runs out, and before your car is too heavily damaged. Neat. And it shows off the damage model too, which we didn't get to see in the prior games, for the most part. Really, the thing I like the most about this game is a brand new techno soundtrack. And there's an 80s inspired track too, which is fun and a breath of fresh air compared to Davilex as usual. Oh yeah, and the dreaded radars are back. Taking away €50 unless you knock them down, where you gain €100. But yeah, otherwise it's just a short little game, and you can get some enjoyment out of it, just not too much. So let's get back onto the game oddities, starting with the help menu, which uses a Microsoft agent, which if you don't know what that is, think Clippy, Rover, or Expand Dong himself. So let's have a look through the INI files. What you may be surprised about is the fact that the Super Cop, which is the early name for DT Harry, has a lot of variables in the way that he drives, in terms of aggression, tactics and speed. Which is crazy, because in the gameplay all he does is bash into you at full speed. Likewise with the communicator, the voices that you hear and see in the bottom left corner have an extensive system for what is communicated. Unfortunately, since I don't speak Dutch or German, I cannot vouch for this, but it seems like a big evolution over M25 Racer's police announcements. Likewise, Davilex was more creative with the cops, with multiple cop cars trying to slow you down, and the roadblocks that are set up in each stage. They all have a little animation for the cars coming in to block you. It's superficial, but it works far better than M25 Racer. We can change how many cops are on us, which I presume relates to rubber banding, and so on. This was also present in Holiday Racer, but it is used more effectively here. The game is also really flexible in being able to change settings about it on the fly. It's less hard-coded than before. And on a final note, the downloadable screensaver has some concept sketches, wireframes and 3D models on display, though not too many. And finally, here's the last game to run on Davilex's 90s game engine, Europe Racer. It's a game very much like London Racer World Challenge, except despite reusing most of the tracks, the devs actually put an effort into adding brand new tracks and cars. I mean, for those living in the UK for example, the only tracks from this generation of Davilex's games you would have had access to were the UK and French tracks, from London Racer and Holiday Racer respectively. But here, you get access to tracks not only from regional titles like A2 Racer and Autobahn Racer, but brand new tracks set in Spain, Sweden, Greece, Italy and Russia. And of course, they are all very well made, although this engine was starting to look a bit dated at this point, hence the switch to Game Biro a year later. We have the 3 leagues back once again. However here, instead of being separated by speed, we have a standard car league, sports car league and an SUV league. Ooh. And what's even more interesting is that the cars that you are able to choose are dictated by which club you join. There's a club for the Netherlands, London, Germany, Russia, Italy, Japan, USA and France. And as you might expect, each club has cars from its respective country, for the most part, although I have been tipped off that some of the cars in the intro to each league are not actually in the game. But yeah, gameplay wise I don't have much to say, since it plays very much like A2 Racers 4, including the wacky physics. Though seeing that one of the videos had the car flip by itself, maybe it was actually meant to be like this. But I will point out a brand new soundtrack, with some of the songs being reused in London Racer 2 and London Racer Destruction Madness. There are pedestrians now, like was the case with the early A2 Racer games, except then they were just static bitmaps, while here they walk around and run away from your car. And hey look, we finally have snow and rain particle effects, we finally got there in the end. And there is now an elimination death mode, that's new. I'm likely forgetting some stuff about this game, but I'm running out of time in terms of producing this video. So for anything that I have missed in these games, please do let me know, and I will make an addendum in part 2. In terms of debug stuff, there is over 200 INI files, so let me just point out the most interesting ones. Each opponent has different desires on picking up money and turbo. They all have different variables on how irritated they get and how risky they are. There is also more debug options for testing out AI, particle effects and so on. You can really tell that Davilex was putting a lot more effort into making the AI better than it was game by game, and giving each driver a unique personality, not just in terms of these internal values, but in terms of the fact that they all have different voice acting and just the sheer amount of drivers that you can pick. And thus, that finally concludes this first part. Make sure you stay subscribed for part 2 for looking at the 2002 to 2005 Racer games. And please let me know what you thought in the comments below, and once again, anything that I've missed or I've got wrong, please let me know so I can do an addendum in part 2. Cheers!